Thank you. And it's obviously important, and Roseanne, for you and John invited me to speak here today. But I need to give you some background as to why I was invited and why I'm here. I served for 20 years in the Israel Defense Forces. I live in Israel. I teach law at the University of Utah. During the course of my career in the IDF, I was deeply involved in implementation of the Oslo peace process. I want to emphasize I was not in Oslo. I was not part of the team that drafted Oslo. But when they came back and they began the process of implementing Oslo, I at the time was serving as the IDF's, Israel Defense Forces, legal advisor in the Gaza Strip. And I was invited to be on the implementation team, actually plural teams. And I did that for a number of years. And I don't want to get into the politics of it. I certainly don't want to get into the politics of Israel today for those of you who follow it. But when I finished my involvement, and when I finished with the IDF and I came to America, a colleague of mine asked me to write an article, or invited me to write an article about my involvement in the implementation of the peace process. And I wrote an article which was published by Cardozo Law Review, and it's that article that led to Vargas and Jerry and Tom to invite me to come to Pittsburgh. And for better or for worse, and we could talk about this forever for reasons that are unclear to me, there are a couple of books written by Israelis who were in Oslo. I believe I'm the only Israeli who's written about the implementation process. And so when I came to Pittsburgh, again, I want to emphasize, I had no idea what AHP was. And if you were to ask me today to explain it to you, I probably still can't explain it to you. But I did see it as a unique opportunity to bring my modest experiences of 7 or 8 years of on-the-ground implementation to try to participate in this unique model. And whether or not we succeeded, I leave that to others to judge. Indeed, as Vargas said, we have a book out, which was, I thought it was a great experience to work on it because we try to bring to the reader what we had worked on. From my perspective, here's what was interesting about this, and I think why it's so important. One, it's utterly unique. I begin with that. Because when I was involved in negotiating implementation of Oslo in the Gaza Strip, there was a sense of, I don't know if the expression is zero sum, but zero sum. Everything was what we were hammering out. One side won, one side lost. And at the end of the day, when you have that approach, both sides lose. So that was, for me, one of my takeaways, that there was always this given in the negotiations here, there was always a winner-loser. That's one. Two, one of my fundamental takeaways from the 7 or 8 years I spent negotiating with the Palestinians, and by the way, I want to emphasize here, my politics are irrelevant and I'm not casting aspersions on this side or that side whatsoever. I don't think we understood the Palestinians at all. I don't think the Palestinians understood us. And more problematic than that, we did not know what the Palestinians wanted. The Palestinians didn't know what we wanted. And worse than that, we didn't know what we wanted. And I don't speak on behalf of the Palestinians, but I don't know if they knew what they wanted. So there was a lack of external familiarity, but there was also a lack of internal familiarity. And that's super important. Next, there was a sense of, and I don't like the expression, so I apologize in advance, of a little bit making it up as you go along. The lack of clear guidelines. And if you look at the book that we wrote and look at the Pittsburgh Principles, which is in many ways the thrust of the book, I don't know, Vargas, if you're going to talk about it at some point, it really lays out this very clear A, B, C, D, E, F way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the beauty of the work that the teams did, and I'll talk about that in a second, that we did over the course of how many years we worked on this, 10, is ultimately, and this is super important, we ultimately brought to the room people who actually knew what the hell they were talking about. Because, and again, if Vargas disagrees with me, he'll raise his hand or throw a tomato at me. It took a while for us in Pittsburgh or wherever else we met in the world, not important where, to bring to the table people who actually understood what the process, what the issues were. And that is super important. When I think, if we're going to be involved again, you can only have people who actually know the issues. If you have people who don't know the issues, they get caught up in the politics of it. If you get caught up in the politics of it, you cannot make a substantive contribution to the issues that need to be addressed. And we had, I think we're all friends here. We had ups and downs. We had hurdles to cross in terms of people who clearly had an agenda when we were working this in Pittsburgh. And I found that to be very problematic. And one of my takeaways is you can only have people who know what they're talking about. That's critical. One of the really important things that happened in the AHP process, and again, I don't know, Vargas, if it's you, Jerry, or Tom who created this model, that in addition to the hours we spent negotiating, hours over the course of 5 intensive days, morning until night, there was a lot of time for socializing. And I confessed to the crime that it took me a while to understand that, because I thought it was a little bit of a pain in the ass. Got to have breakfast together, lunch together, dinner together. Khalas, as we say in Arabic, you want to go your own way. But actually, that socialization or socializing, I thought was really important, because it enabled us to move on a little bit from the sitting in the room and, hammering it out and, kind of bullshitting with each other. And I thought that was really important. Obviously, it took a while to warm up because, team A would sit with itself, team B with itself, and up, but it worked. And I think that's something that, for those of you who are involved in negotiations, the idea of the socializing is really important, even though I felt at first that it was forced, it was a little bit artificial, but I felt that was really important. I take it back when I was negotiating here. I don't think did a very good job with it. I don't think that we had a sense of we're trying to resolve an issue together. In Pittsburgh, there was a sense of trying to resolve the issue together. So now you have to understand that from my perspective, I've been involved in this 2 different worlds. The world here with the Israelis, Palestinians, when I was the lawyer for the Israeli side, and the Pittsburgh process, which was 3 or 4 teams working together. When we were negotiating here, not only did we not understand what we wanted, confession, I told you I don't know if they understood what they wanted. We did not have a clearly articulated, if you will, swim lane of what it is we're trying to achieve. So while the Oslo Accord was signed in 1994, it said in 5 years there'll be a Palestinian state created. They signed that. Okay, that's great. Good for them. That's what they did in Oslo. When they came back from Oslo, and I've been open about this, and this is, I think, an important takeaway. Those who wrote Oslo, at least the Israelis, never met with the implementers. And I've written that, and that for me was one of the major failings of the Israeli Oslo team. They came back to Israel. Not once did I ever talk to anyone who was involved in the writing of the Oslo peace process. I actually have met with one of them. There were a number of them there. I have met with one of them, and I blasted him. I said, I don't know how the hell what you bastards thought. You went to Oslo, you were, wined and dined in Oslo. It was a lot of fun. You come back and you don't meet with schlumps like me, and then you mandate me to go implement what you wrote with the Palestinians. In many ways, in retrospect, that was one of the primary failings of the Oslo process. Which meant then that from the perspective of people like myself, and I hate the expression, because we didn't have anyone guiding us, we were making up as we went along. And that is highly problematic when you're implementing piece of paper that you've been given, that has been signed. The White House, the signing ceremony with Clinton, but we had no idea of what the so-called architects intended. I have no idea if my Palestinian counterparts met with their Palestinian leadership. Us Israelis never met with the Israeli architects. And any of you who are involved in negotiating on the 2 different levels, on the drafting, Oslo, and the implementation, me, in Gaza, if there's no interaction between the 2 distinct groups, it is all but impossible to be able to move forward, because people like me, lead lawyer, 3 different committees, I had no idea what the hell what they wanted. That's a major failing. Next, language is incredibly important, obviously. But let me give you an example that will cause some of you to absolutely roll your eyes. one of the most important, maybe the most important aspect of the Oslo peace process was something called safe passage. The safe passage were two roads connecting the West Bank to the Gaza Strip. Road A, Road B, two roads. In the Oslo Agreement, there's maybe a paragraph in there that says there will be safe passage between Gaza and West Bank. Okay. So because I've written about this, I'm being very open about this. I got a phone call from a one-star Israeli general who says to me, what are you doing tomorrow? So, I don't know how many of you have served in the military, but when a one-star asks you, what are you doing tomorrow? The obvious answer is whatever the hell you tell me to do. He says, well, you're going to go negotiate safe passage tomorrow. I said, okay. And do I get any instructions, guidelines? He says, no. And he said to me those scariest words as a lawyer you can ever hear, which were, we trust you. So that is actually scary as hell, because it means if you do well, they get credit, and if you screw up, it's on you. So I met with the Palestinian counterpart who I knew, and he gives me the Palestinian version of safe passage, which was 100% unacceptable to the Israeli side. Fine, it's how negotiations begin. I went back to my office. I wrote the Israeli version without any guidance. I gave it to him, and then he says to me, and I quote, if I give this to Arafat, I will be, metaphorically, I'll be shot. I said, well, okay, now we're stuck. You have your extreme side, I have my extreme side. What do we do? And then I went back to the Israeli side and I said, okay, this is where we are. Extreme. What do we do? He said, take a week to do this and you can resolve the problem. I said, fine, 1 week. 5 years later, took us 5 years to negotiate safe passage. And it turned out, and we didn't know this, we never understood that for the Palestinians, if you look at a map, West Bank, Gaza Strip, in the middle there's this thing called Israel. The road system went through Israel. Nobody gave consideration, like, how do you actually go from side A to side B? 5 years. And here's why. I don't know how many of you speak Arabic or Hebrew. In Arabic, there's no pay, no P. We were calling it ma'avar batuach, which means safe passage. Batuach is safe. The Palestinians were using the term ma'avar patuach with a P, which is open passage. We're talking safe passage. They're talking open passage. We're in a meeting, myself, a 2-star Israeli general, and a 2-star Palestinian general, by the way, who I liked a lot. And he's talking open, patuach. We're talking safe, batuach. It hits then that the two sides never understood what the hell they were talking about. So when I came to Pittsburgh, I don't know if Vargas will remember this. I said, one of the first things we're going to absolutely have to do is have a clear understanding of terminology. So as a lawyer, we're all about definitions and definitions. Yes, I know, boring as hell. But at the end of the day, you absolutely have to have a clear understanding of what particular words mean. Because if you don't have to agree on the definitions. You can have your definitions, I can have my definitions, but I have to know what your definitions are, and you have to know what my definitions are. Because absent that, there's no way to proceed forth. So rule number 1 is definition. Rule number 2 is what the hell is the end game? And Vargas is holding a copy of our book, and we put in the book something that is controversial, and will offend some of you, but so we say neither sei gesund. That's just the way it is. We all, and people like me, talk about a 2-state solution. State of Palestine, which I support, state of Israel, obviously, which I support. I live here. But here's the reality. And if it offends some of you, it's the way it is. The Palestinian entity is comprised of the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority is, and comprised of Gaza, where Hamas is. Hamas and the Palestinians and the Palestinian Authority, frankly, hate each other more than they hate us. So we made an agreement, it's written in the book. I'm not telling you anything that's not in the book. That the 10 years we spent, the Israelis and the Palestinians meeting, again, not important where we met. And also, I'm sure Vargas explained this to you, we will never, ever say who was in the room with us, which Israelis were with us, what Palestinians were with us, never, ever, because we're all signed in this. But the Palestinians said, you cannot bring anyone from Gaza, which then means the following. If we're going to try to solve this 2-state solution or create a 2-state, but the Palestinians don't want anyone from Gaza in the room, can you really create a 2-state solution? And I, to this day, and again, I think the book we wrote, not because we wrote, I was involved, I think it's an excellent book, but it leaves unanswered a question that is essential to any of you who want to go negotiate or are negotiating. What is your intended end game? And do the two sides understand each other's end game? Go back to what I said to you about Oslo. Oslo said, at the end of the day, there'll be a Palestinian state. Were they truly aware of the extraordinary tensions between Gaza and West Bank? At the time, it was easier because Arafat was, so the head of the, PA, stepping in the shoes of the PLO. Today, because Gaza is ruled by Hamas and the Palestinian Authority rules the West Bank, that whole notion of a two-state solution is extremely problematic, given the relationship between the West Bank, Gaza, Palestinian Authority, and Gaza, Hamas. Why do I share that too much detail with you? Because one of my takeaways from this is each side has to be brutally honest with itself in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And the more time we spent, and I want to give a shout out to the final team we had in place. I mean, people knew what they were doing. It was clear to us that we were making a decision that was highly problematic and maybe to a certain sense self-defeating, because we were having in the room only people who were discussing the West Bank, and we left Gaza, Hamas out there. Full stop. X years ago, when I was involved in the process, I met with Mohammed Dakhlan. Those of you who don't know who Mohammed Dakhlan is, he was Arafat's strong man in the Gaza Strip. And we're talking about this. I mean, what's going to happen? How do we resolve all of this? And Dakhlan said to me the following, and I think it's in the book, Vargas. Dakhlan said to me, leave us alone until we get our house in order. So that's problematic. First of all, he's right. You can't negotiate until you know what the hell you want, until you know exactly who you're representing. On the other hand, there is a danger for those of us who live here in having this, if you will, quote unquote, status quo with issues unresolved. Full stop. There's a school of thought, which I've shared with Vargas, which we've talked about endlessly, that, again, without politics, but statement, that the irresolution or non-resolution serves current political leadership, and that there's a sense of a mutually beneficial relationship between Netanyahu and the head of the Palestinian Authority, Abu Mazen, that non-resolution serves their purposes. On the other hand, what we created in the course of those years in the Pittsburgh principles in the book, 100%, and I stand by this, 100% lays out a roadmap for resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It requires political will. Whether there is political will, different question. But what is important for me that you all know is that, again, I can't explain AHP to you under any condition. I don't get the math. I don't get the model. But I saw how it works. And I saw that at the end of the day, we absolutely had an implementable model that you could give like this to political leadership if they were interested, and they could absolutely resolve the conflict. Why does it work? It works for the following reasons. One, because it was predicated, and this is not some BS mantra. It works, first of all, because there was mutual respect. That's point one. The sides respected each other. But I also want to emphasize, and if Vargas agrees or disagrees with me, you can, pipe in. I don't think everybody always liked each other, but that's not always important. Was there tension in the room? Yes. Was there yelling in the room? Yes. Were people pissed off with each other? Yes. So what? There's always show and negotiation. So we didn't like each other. You know what? So what? But we stuck to the course because we understood that this was a unique opportunity predicated on this extraordinary model that Tom created that is utterly and totally unique. And the reason it was unique in the Israeli-Palestinian context is because it correctly didn't say you win on this issue and you win on this issue. I cannot emphasize to you strongly enough how important it was in the terms of our culture and their culture to be able to sit and to try to resolve without having a winner on this issue and a loser on this issue. In terms of the social dynamics of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, having a sense of together, you don't have to like each other. I want to emphasize that. But coming to a resolution per issue where each side felt that it got something, that was a totally different model. And I think that's one of the reasons that AHP, at least here, if we had political leadership that's willing, is an extraordinary model because it provided both sides with a clear sense that on each issue, you may not like the final resolution, but you got enough that you could be satisfied with it. The other side, did they get everything they wanted? No, of course not. But there was enough there that they could be satisfied with it, enable them to move forward. And in the context of moving forward, again, one of the beauties of this AHP system is put aside the math. Dummies like me don't get the math. It would be easy for political leadership to go speak to their respective publics and to present the findings of AHP. Why? Because it's not a zero-sum game. And when I was negotiating, in those years that I've referenced before, there was a constant sense of, I don't know if this is the right term, Vargas, you'll correct me, of this one man's upship that you always have to get up the other side. That's not what AHP is founded on. And I think that's one of the reasons AHP has been used and successfully, as I understand, in Northern Ireland and South Africa. And I think also that's the reason that it can be absolutely implemented elsewhere around the world. I'm a huge proponent of it because both sides can go to their respective publics and show them not victory, but moving forward. And that then leads to the next important point. There was never a sense of you have to win on this issue. You got to win on this issue, unlike when I did it officially. Because when I did it officially, you had to come to our public and they to their public with a sense of not a victory, but getting that point. That's not what AHP works on. And that's why it's so successful. Full stop. In 1999, I was invited or told, well, when you're in the IDF, you're not invited, you're told. I was sent to Washington, D.C. to negotiate safe passage under the auspices of the Clinton administration. And when we got to Washington, D.C., we all signed an NDA that we will never, ever disclose that we were negotiating in Washington. We were taken to what is referred to, I don't know how many of you have been to in Washington, a secret installation in Northern Virginia, which is euphemism, obviously, for the agency. We arrived on a Sunday. We signed this document, never, ever, 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 ever disclose this. Monday morning, the lead headline of the Washington Post, banner headline, Washington Post, secret Israeli-Palestinian teams negotiating in Washington, D.C. So obviously somebody had leaked to the Washington Post that we were there, which was, a bummer, but it is what it is. We spent 5 days negotiating safe passage. This is a story that I've written about that's important for you who are involved in negotiating. We sat in a room about the size of Israel. There were 2 Israelis on this side, and there were 2 Palestinians, in a different zip code, and there were 3 Americans over here. The 3 Americans all had the same first name, Jim, no last names. So I assume one was from the CIA, one was from, it was ridiculous. There was no, and I apologize for the word, sorry, but there was no intimacy because we were literally yelling at each other. At the end of the 5 days, we met with Dennis Ross, who was then Clinton's Middle East negotiator. And we said to Dennis Ross, we're done. We have a safe passage agreement. This was on a Friday. We flew back to Israel, and then we met in a hotel in Jerusalem. Because I wrote the agreement, I was given this great honor of, signing ceremony, picture, photo opportunity to give it to the Palestinian side. The same 2-star general who I had referenced to earlier when we say safe passage, open passage, and I gave him the document which he and I had negotiated for 5 days. He and I negotiated this for 5 days. Every goddamn word we fought over. And I give it to him, photo opportunity. Every TV station in the world is there. This is a great moment. My parents are watching this on TV. They're proud of their kid. The Palestinian looks at the document and says to me the following magical words. Amos, I've always known you to be smart, but I've never known you to be a writer of fiction. Boom. What had happened? he had gone back to meet with Arafat, who was totally pissed off with him and said, never, don't agree this. And so that failed. That can't happen in AHP. And it can happen in AHP, I suggest respectfully, because both sides are working together to resolve it with the two critical understandings. On some issues, you get a little bit more. On some issues, I get a little bit more, but no one loses. And at the end of the day, there is a sense of commonality, and put aside all the pressure, the tension, the drama, and the yelling, all that I referenced earlier. HP in our context was extraordinarily effective because the final product is 100% implementable in a way that both sides can go to their respective publics and say, here is a product that works for both. Again, leaving Gaza out, that enables people to be able to lead normal lives in all the anormalcy of the Middle East and particularly of our region. That is, from my perspective, why it was such a great honor to be involved in AHP, because again, I say for the third time, I don't get the math, I don't get the model. I mean, Tom Saute was a genius in a way that I don't understand what the model is, but I saw how it works. And I saw how...
Are you finished, Amos?
One more sentence. How groups of experts who understand the legitimacy of the other side, again, emphasize not to like each other, but understand the legitimacy of the other side, are able to put together this Pittsburgh principle that is an extraordinary product that can be used for generations to come. Professor Vargas.
So I wanted to mention that the first topic you talked about in communications is actually in chapter 10 in the book, when you talk about the lack of communication between implementers and developers. That was one piece. The second one was we forgot to mention Marcel. Marcel was involved in helping with the negotiations all the time from the very beginning.
Before you, my apologies.
Remember, because remember when we did develop the models, we weren't all in the same room. There was the Palestinians, then developed their priorities and their wishes, and then we came together afterwards when we got some results. So it wasn't like we sitting, like you said, in a room screaming at each other. Okay, that was not the issue. So Marcel was integral on that. He was in the helping the Israeli side. I was helping the Palestinian side. In part, that happened because Tom told me that I was an Israeli sympathizer, so I went to the other side. And Marcel didn't have any choice when he went to the Israeli side, and then he was branded as an Israeli sympathizer, which he's not. He's perfectly neutral. So there you are. That's the reason why this happened. Okay, that was the first thing I wanted to mention.
No, but Marcel, don't shoot me. You're right. I apologize 100 times over.
Now, the second thing I wanted to say is about there was never an agreement between Tom, myself, or even Jerry's offer when we come up with the product. We never asked you, actually, Marcel. Do you think that this is a roadmap, or do you think that this is an experiment? So in Tom's view, if I can paraphrase it, say the thing, because he's not here to say it, but I remember saying, no, this is not a roadmap. This is not a solution. This is an experiment to show that AHP works. That's what he wanted to say. And Jerry's software was much in agreement with him on that. But I was more in agreement with Amos, more like this is actually a roadmap, because the people involved, if you knew them, were actually integral part of the Israeli and Palestinian societies. And so the question is, it kind of opens the door to actually to the next plenary on tomorrow. We're talking about, can you have a democratic approach using AHP to decide on the concessions that you're going to trade? So think about it. You ask the whole Israelis to do pair comparisons or whatever, and all the Palestinians do the same thing in a referendum kind of thing. They come together and they can see that perhaps they are together. And the question is, I don't know, in what Dr. Ray is going to talk about tomorrow, is that they use a large number of people, not just experts. So experts sometimes are the people who suffer the consequences of the conflict. That's the experts, not just the people who think what they want to have. And that's the difference between how do you define an expert? Amos, how do you define?
Yeah, so I want to say three things. One, Marcel, first of all, I apologize 150 times over. I hope that's not the end of our beautiful relationship. I apologize publicly, and I'll put it in writing, and I'll send it to your family. That's one. Two, I never felt this was an intellectual exercise. I felt this was hard. This was practical, because what was running through my mind constantly was how we're going to present this to leadership. I mean, the Palestinians to their side, the Israelis to their side, and in America. I never, with all due respect to Jerry and Tom, I never view this as a mere intellectual exercise. I view this as something that can be given to political leadership for three reasons. One, because there were people in the room who, again, what I call experts, who knew what the hell they were talking about. Two, because they didn't have they weren't involved in the politics of it. So they were, in that sense, perhaps more objective. And three, because of the uniqueness of AHP, because of the non-zero sum game aspect of it. I have felt those 10 years, how many years that we all worked together, including Marcel, I had to work that in there. We weren't just bullshitting each other about some academic exercise. We were negotiating. And I think, by the way, Vargas, the Palestinians didn't view this as if you ask me, they didn't view this as an intellectual exercise. They were coming to wherever we met in order to negotiate, in order to bring to their leadership a roadmap to move forward. Mm-hmm. I don't think they viewed this as some, abstract intellectual BSing. And the Israelis who were involved, particularly once we understood what Israelis needed to be in the room, once we finally gotten rid of those who didn't need to be there, I don't think they at all view this as an academic
So let me
exercise.
ask you a question. Why is it that, I know the book is recent and it just came out this year, and may not have had a chance to, we try to send it to people to see what they think. I mean, for example, I tried to send it to the Biden administration, although the people who tried to give it to him, they're not allowed to give it to the president anything, so they have to go to the second hand. So they always put it in a closet, probably. And also to the Israeli side and to the Palestinian side. But the question is, why is it that people have not taken it to heart to read it? And is it too complicated what we wrote?
So before I answer, Marcel, I see that you have your Zoom hand up.
Thanks, Amos. So Nigel asked yesterday when we were talking about using AHP for conflict resolution, he asked the question about, it seems like this can be an extremely exhausting process. And I wonder if you can comment a little bit, because we did work on this for years under some extremely long conditions. I wonder if you can talk from your experience about combating fatigue, negotiation fatigue, and going through the process.
So three answers, but first, Marcel, I will answer that. Vargas, in terms of the book's adaptability, I mean, I think it's hard because the math is hard. I don't have a really good answer for it, because I thought, I've read the, whatever the reviews are out there. I thought the book is understandable. I don't have a really good answer for you on that one. Marcel, in terms of the exhaustion. So in the years that I was involved in this stuff, there were, peaks and valleys in terms of sheer physical exhaustion. And I think here, the days were long, right? We would arrive on Sunday mornings, and there was, Sunday dinner, if I recall correctly, and then Monday through Friday. It was hard. It was tiring. And yes, you guys fed us well, probably too well. Those breakfast, lunch, and dinners. There was a sense of I think both physical and mental fatigue. Those of you who have negotiated 5 days from 9 o'clock in the morning until, in essence, 8, 9 at night. Those are long ass days. I run, so I guess I would run in the morning, but I don't know what other people were doing to get a mental health break. It was hard. On the other hand, I think also from a practical perspective, y'all were bringing people in from around the world to wash, to wherever, not important to where you were bringing us. It's expensive, and to keep us there for 10 days is much more expensive than 5 or 6 days. I think there's also a cost factor. But again, if somebody were to ask me, would you do it again? In a heartbeat, I'd say, hell yes. Even though it is hard, it is. And, I teach at the University of Utah, and I had an arrangement with my deans that if I need to, disappear for a week, I would disappear for a week. It does demand a certain, time flexibility. I think that you are right, Marcel. It is exhausting. And I think probably that exhaustion led to irritation occasionally. I think it also led sometimes to the drama, which is a little bit, maybe a part and parcel of it. But again, because the book speaks for itself and the Pittsburgh principles speak for themselves, I think even though people got, exhausted, tired, I think we were all incredibly focused. And hang on, one more word, Vargas, one more word. I think all of us, again, when we got to the really good teams, people were extremely respectful of the undertaking. Go ahead, Vargas.
I want to mention that we forget to say that the reason why the success of the application of the HP here was not because of the HP itself, but because of the technology we use along with the HP. That's thanks to Decision Lens, John Sati and Daniel, that allows us to use the technology they had at the time, the famous clickers, right, to do pair comparisons with intensity of preference. And if you didn't realize the importance of that is, I remember one afternoon when we were doing pair comparison with the Israelis, and the clickers, they stopped working. That's what happens with technology, always breaks when it's necessary. And so rather than installing the software, we decided, well, why don't we just run the experiment at pair comparisons? And you'll be surprised how quickly groupthink took over the process. And what the senior member said, everybody followed. But when they had the clickers themselves and they had to vote, they voted on their own with intensity of preferences, the leader didn't tell them what to do, and they didn't know who was voting what.
That's right.
We knew that there was a divergence there, right? So that's the reason I want to say that. Thank you, John and Daniel and Rosanna, for allowing us to use that technology, which, by the way, we still have in my office, and we used it recently for police community relations. But that's
I think that's you're right about Decision Lens. And I think there was that moment where Group A was looking at leader of Group A and taking their lead from him.
Right.
That was, I think, Vargas Marcelo, to the best of my recollection, that was the only time there was a sense of group think, which was one of the beauties along the how many ever years we did this. I never had a sense of group think. I had a sense that every participant was, he or she was a free agent. And I think that would enhance the effectiveness of it. That one setting was a classic, and we could do an experiment on this, how groupthink can be very, very problematic. And I thought here it was a wonderful, not wonderful, but a poignant example of the negatives of groupthink. I think that's right. I've talked for 40 minutes. Unless I bored all of you to tears, I'd be totally open to questions. Unless I bored you all to tears.
Anyone can talk, ask questions. So let me just mention to you that Marcel, Amos, and myself, and the speaker of tomorrow's plenary session, Mercury Ray, have published a paper recently in Group Decision and Negotiation with studying the problem in Ukraine. So the approach is not about developing a roadmap, was more about what does it take to be able to solve the conflict, which is two different questions. How do you end it? And you'll discover quickly after you read that it's not that simple. But we didn't provide a solution, but at least we know what is needed, which is difficult to take, by the way, in my opinion. If you want a copy of the paper,
Roseanne, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to say I completely agree with Amos about the socializing. I was only the wife, of Tom Sadi's, but I got invited to the lunches and the dinners, and they were always great dinners, right? The food was usually excellent from at least my American perspective. And the interesting thing was how the people from either side would start chatting, and it would turn out that they went to the same university. They had the same professors. They knew the same music. And I think it may have been the first time they actually talked to somebody from the other side. So that socializing was extremely important. I think also that there was a respite. That's where you got a little rest from this very stressful interaction that was going on all the time. So one other point about the length of the process. It took you, 5 days of 10-hour days or 10-hour days or something? But think how long the negotiations have been going on. The Oslo peace thing went on for a long, long time. If you add up all the time that has been spent in negotiation versus something that actually came to some kind of a resolution, I think that there's something to be said for having to go through the painful process of making pairwise comparisons and actually defining what you mean by all the terms. That's an important thing. And finally, a call out to Luis. He made the most beautiful map that on it, it was huge. It was the size of a dining room table, and it had the points on it that were contention, like, well, this crossing or this field or this, I don't know, water source or something. They were all on his map. And the Middle East desk, whatever they call it in Washington, supposedly responsible for the negotiations, borrowed a copy of Luis's map.
Actually, that is Marcel's too, by the way. Marcel and I did it together. And that map, I have it in my office, by the way, because I wanted to preserve the history, right? So when Jerry's offer retired, I asked for that map. And so in that map, there are scribbles around by the Palestinians and Israeli representatives trading what percentage of the territories they wanted to have. So that's amazing. One day, if you want to, I mean, I don't think there's a copy in the book. It's a copy similar, prepared for the book, but a copy of that map I can make available because there are no names in there.
But it's true. It's not that they asked for a copy of it.
They did. Roseanne, I want to follow up on a point that you made. It's not important who. I won't tell you who. But over the course of the 10 years we worked together, there were 2 Palestinians who were involved who, I'm going to be very careful how I state this. I had previous interaction with under different kinds of circumstances. And that's what the beauty of this process is it brings to the table people who, again, know what the hell they're talking about and have different backgrounds, not buddy. We met under, different circumstances. But because Vargas, Marcel, Tom, and Jerry were able to bring people who knew what they were talking about, it meant also that people who had, obviously, like in my case, met different circumstances, but because there's a sense of a purpose there, of a common purpose to solve this most intractable of conflicts, you put aside, whatever feelings you may have, which are not relevant. And you're right, Roseanne. I remember at one of the dinners, you and I sat next to each other. And I remember there was this, we'd all, been in a pissing contest during the day, but then you have dinner and you're like, turns out, you have kids the same age, kids interested in the same kind of stuff. And then there's that human element, which I can't sufficiently emphasize how important that is, even though those 5 days are hard and long.
So just
other questions, friends.
Demo questions around?
Yeah, Sergei?
Yeah, this is me. I'm currently in Ukraine, and since Louis has mentioned Ukraine, I would like to ask, maybe we are not at the point when we can think of negotiations, but maybe there are some outcomes from the new negotiations you conducted using AHP, which we could already use and think about. So any lessons for Ukraine in its present condition?
Before Vargas answers, hang on, wait, before Vargas answers, I want to say something to you, sir. First and foremost, I'm sure I'm speaking here for everybody. I wish you safety.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you all.
For you and your family, sir.
So I wanted to say to you, can I call you Sergey?
Sergey. Anything.
Sorry, Sergey. Yes. Sorry about that. I felt safe. I'd say Dr. Kadenko rather than Sergey, but Sergey is good. It's the G. That's good.
Yeah, sure.
In the paper we wrote, we actually didn't say what the Ukraine need to do. We wrote it as NATO Russia.
Yeah, I saw the title. I saw the title in the chat.
Okay. That's about all we can say. As I said, we don't have the experience you have there, but not on the ground.
Yeah, but Israel is the closest analogy which we can think of now.
Right.
Really. So.
If it's okay with you, sir, I'm going to put in the chat my email. What you just said, that last point, I'm putting it here for everybody. I'd be interested in chat, if it's okay with you, if it's possible, to communicate offline. Are you allowed? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, sure. Like emailing.
Emailing.
Yeah, sure. Why not? If you have something to share, like anything counts. I mean,
I just put it in the chat, sir.
okay,
I
so
see the chats here. Wait.
yeah, I'll just copy it somewhere.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you. Thank you. Other questions, friends?
What is the current situation in Israel and Palestinian? Sorry, I was so busy with this conference. I cut off myself with all the events of the world. So
Disaster.
So
Disaster.
here, I can only speak for the Israeli side at the moment. We had elections last month or in October. It appears to be that Netanyahu will be the prime minister again. He's forming what will be a very right-wing government with strong religious overtones or undertones, whichever overtones or undertones, depends how you want it. I think the Palestinian issue is not going to be of interest to them at all. But hang on, there's a but to that. This government, because if it comes to formation, is so right-wing that you will see what's called in English creeping annexation of the West Bank, in which there's no desire to negotiate with the Palestinians. There's desire to make the West Bank a part of Israel in a way that it has not been before. The question is, how will the Biden administration respond to that? And how will the European Union respond to that? And there's been made very clear to Netanyahu that both Biden and the Europeans will view this with very significant disfavor. The Palestinian Authority has been very quiet on this. And frankly, so is Hamas in Gaza. There's been no noise, I mean, literal or figurative noise. But I would think for the so-called peace camp, what's the song by Simon and Garfunkel, Troubled Waters? This is, Troubled Waters a little bit. And we'll see where it goes. On the other hand, there's talk, because he's having so much difficulty forming a government, there's talk about what's called a reconciliation government, which would be right-wing with centrist. I don't know if that will happen, but if indeed if this extreme right-wing party government comes into fruition, it would have a serious impact on any kind of peace process.
And I say that's a very interesting idea that you just proposed. I mean, I know it's just a thought, but if the West Bank joins Israel, they become unified.
No. They don't join.
Wait, let me finish. I still think that's a good idea. And then Gaza can become the Palestinian state that used to be impossible because
I see. Yeah, but the idea is that when they say annexation, the Palestinians living in the West Bank won't have rights.
Oh,
They won't be part of a state.
I see.
They will be annexed. They won't be part of a state. It's
That's what
actually anyone who's center left in Israel. The idea of annexing the West Bank is a disaster magnified. Same for the Palestinians. It denies them any rights. For them, it would be horrible. Which is why I think that the Biden administration, the European Union, is making it very clear this is a non-starter.
So we have sent books or excerpts. So we have a famous booklet that's set confidentially on one side about the summary of the results of the implementation principles, and to different people, but nobody has ever even attempted to mention. They just go as if nothing happened. So what's your connection there with the people we used to send these things to? What's your sense?
Those who I am aligned with, again, I don't want to get into politics. We are in disfavor.
Or you did consider you as in disfavor, not in the favor camp. So whatever we say is irrelevant. That's what basically they're saying, right?
At the moment, the new government would not view any of this favorably.
Yeah.
again, and I think, but also I want to emphasize the Palestinians are also being very cautious in how they're going to approach this new government. Other questions?
We have about 5-6 minutes. So just to give you an idea how long it took, we started in 2009. Oh, Roseanne, you wanted to say something?
No, no,
So
please.
we started in 2009, putting together the groups, and I was on the side. I have to give most of the credit to Tom and Jerry especially for the fundraising. They were the people who put together most of the people, as I would say. I was just the secretary there doing the work. So it doesn't matter that I participated, which was very interesting. By 2011, we had the Pittsburgh Principles. It took us another 8 years to develop them as they are in the book. And of course, they are just what these participants said, right? And that's it. That's what we have. We discovered that we need about $69 billion or something like that to be able to take care of the refugees. Not 300 billion like they had, but 69 with present dollars. So that's still a significant amount. But amazingly, one of the people we had in the later meetings by the name Terry Senegal, which is actually a French citizen working for the United Nations. He actually works with refugees for Congo and other places to compensate. And he told us that if we were able to get an agreement between the two parties, the United Nations will have practically no problem collecting those $69 billion.
Billion.
So billion with a B, yeah. It's not about the money, it's about the agreement. So no agreement, no money. And that's everybody loses there. So as you said, Amos, I agree with you that it is to their advantage right now, the two political parties, not to do anything. They keep going the same way with our status quo, which is going nowhere.
Yeah, there's an expression which I'm translating from Hebrew, which is this is a permanent or semi-permanent low-grade fever, which is probably a correct terminology of a not happy situation. On the other hand, knock on wood, if you open up your newspaper today, by and large, it's quiet here. There are no, I'm not sure the last time there was a terrorist attack, and I watch there'll be one tomorrow morning, but it's for the moment, it's quiet here. I need to emphasize that.
Actually, I was going to ask, how do you interpret this silence? How do you interpret, what does it mean? Because sometimes there can be a blow after this.
Oh, you're 100% right. You know, there's no vacuum, but at the moment, whether Hamas or the Islamic Jihad or our crazies, there seems to be like quiet. As a matter of fact, the IDF chief of staff, Kochavi, said the other day that statistically, the last 2 years have been the quietest in a zillion years. That doesn't mean there's no terrorism, obviously.
Amos, there is a question from Nigel.
Yes, sir.
He says, in the concession resolution space, what is an example of the equitable resolution or win-win from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict resolution? So give us an example from your recollection of what is a win-win for both of them.
Oh, a peace agreement that's signed. The establishment of a Palestinian state is a win-win. Equitable resolution, and if I'm misspeaking, Marcel Vargas will correct me. I mean, the refugees issue was one of them. The settlements, you know, taking down some of the settlements, putting, and I don't know, we don't like the word population transfer, but maybe putting people in the desert, in the Negev, moving people around in a way that would be equitable for both sides without using the word population transfer. There are all kinds of models for that. And I think that one of the most important things was that everything, to your question, Nigel, was done in I don't want to say collaboration because that's a dirty word here, but in cooperation. And I think that the biggest win-win was that the Pittsburgh Principles, which maybe Vargas you can make available to everybody, were agreed upon, Nigel, by everybody who was involved. There was unanimity with the understanding. Hang on, Michael, I'm coming to you in a second. Nigel, to your question, if Vargas can make available the Pittsburgh principles, you'll see that's not a perfect for everybody, but there are principles in place that are utterly implementable, which to your question would absolutely result in equitable and win-win. Michael.
Thanks, Amos.
Thank you, gentlemen. Just a quick question. My name is Michael Brown. I'm a new employee to Decision Lens, a former neighbor of John Sadi's. I had the pleasure of having the opportunity to meet Dr. Sadi while he was alive. Mrs. Sadi, good to see you again. It's a real pleasure to be part of the International Symposium for the first time. And thank you all for not only the time here, but the work that you've done over time. My question is, perhaps a simple one. I'm curious to know, I understand the importance of defining the criteria for the decision and having clear definitions on what the criteria are. In a negotiation this complicated, if I may ask, what language was used in the official negotiations and in the room? Maybe it's
when I was involved officially or in Pittsburgh.
When you were involved officially, because differences in the language.
No, you're right.
There are different, understanding of the words. Could you just explain that
Sure.
the complexity of that? It's a simple question, but it's not a simple question.
All documents were written and signed in English. The language around the table was 3 languages.
Yes.
It was English, Arabic, and Hebrew. The Palestinians understood Hebrew much better than Israelis speak Arabic. I repeat, many of the Palestinians speak Hebrew. Very few Israelis speak Arabic. I, as the writer, the drafter, everything was done in English. And there were instances where there were, I think the term would be, Michael, side conversations. That, for instance, Zoom doesn't allow, but side conversations, sometimes in Arabic, with Israelis and Arab and Palestinians in Arabic, those Israelis who speak Arabic in Arabic. And there were clearly, the example I gave you, safe passages, Maval Patuach, that was the clearest example that there was a lack of understanding. Sorry,
that's what
lack of common
thought. That's why I asked the question.
Sorry?
That example triggered this question in my mind.
Yeah, I've spoken about that a lot, and we were in the room, and I want to emphasize that the Palestinian 2-star and I spent 1 million hours together. Mm-hmm. And I assumed that he and the Israeli 2-star had also spent time together. We all knew each other. And we just looked at each other like, pardon my English, sorry for my English. It was like, holy shit, right? Because we've been sitting around the table and somebody, Patuach, that was a critical moment. On the other hand, I'll tell you something interesting, Michael. Vargas, if I have a couple of minutes. One of the really interesting impromptu negotiating sessions I was involved in was between a Palestinian Authority colonel and an IDF colonel, because they had shared military experience. Within 5 minutes, we were able to take care of a problem. Boom, 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 because they had shared professional language. And by the Israeli colonel also spoke Arabic. I didn't speak Arabic, but because I don't speak Arabic, they spoke to me in Hebrew, Arabic. And in 5 minutes, we had really complicated. There was a real tension point. But because they were both senior military officials, they spoke military. And in 5 minutes, we were sitting in a Jeep. There had been a real crisis in Gaza. We're sitting in the Jeep, the 3 of us, and they gave me, I took out a pen, paper, because they were able to speak the same language professionally.
So
that was a great example.
A 4th language then.
Yes.
Into play.
By the way, hang on. Vargas, I don't know if we have more time. Much more so than when civil affairs committees would meet, because there's no common language in civil affairs. There's absolute common language amongst military officials. They all understand use of force, and they also understand positioning of forces. So they have common language. In a certain sense, this goes to Roseanne's point about dinner. All those guys went to the same school, military commanders. Unlike people who did civil affairs, they don't go to the same school. It was much harder.
Thank you very much. My apologies that the video is not more clear here. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to join you. And once again, thanks to you all for the great work that you're doing worldwide.
Thank you, Amos, for a very interesting talk and conversation.
Thank you, friends. And Marcel, I apologize 100 times over. Don't shoot me. Thank you, friends. And Roseanne, it's great to see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.